Part 1. Heather Upton stood in the quiet hallway outside the ballroom, staring at the letter in her hands. The handwriting was unmistakable. Her mother's. For 18 years, the letter had been hidden inside the family Bible, waiting for someone to find it. Heather carefully unfolded the paper. My darling Heather, if you're reading this, then I am no longer here to tell you the truth myself. There is something you deserve to know before you decide who your father really is. Heather's pulse quickened. The first time you applied for your military nomination, you did not fail. Your father stopped it. Heather froze. The words blurred for a moment. She read them again and again. He contacted people behind the scenes and withdrew his support. He was terrified that you would follow your grandfather into the military. When your application was denied, he allowed you to believe it was your own failure. Heather leaned against the wall. For 17 years she had carried that rejection. For 17 years she had believed she wasn't good enough. The truth had been buried the entire time. Tears threatened, but she forced them back. The ballroom doors opened. Inside, guests were taking their seats. The retirement toast was about to begin. Heather folded the letter and slipped it into her clutch. Then she walked back into the room. At the front stood Walter Upton, celebrated engineer, respected executive, and the father who had spent most of her life pretending she didn't exist. The room erupted into applause as he stepped to the microphone. Walter smiled. Tonight was supposed to be his night. For 20 minutes he spoke about success, leadership, and legacy. He praised Brett. He praised Paige. He thanked colleagues, executives, and donors. Then his eyes found Heather at the back table. The smile changed. Every family has someone who chooses a different path, he said. A few guests chuckled. Walter continued. Some paths lead some. Part 2. Margaret Voss stepped onto the stage before anyone could speak. Sit down, Walter, she said calmly. The room froze. For 30 years, Walter Upton had been one of Voss Hartley's most respected executives. Yet in that moment he looked less like a celebrated retiree, and more like a nervous employee. Margaret turned toward Heather. Major Heather Upton, would you join me, please? A ripple of confusion swept through the ballroom. Major? Brett's smile vanished. Paige blinked repeatedly as if she had misheard. Heather slowly walked toward the stage. Margaret faced the audience. Many of you have spent the last year discussing the cyber attack that nearly destroyed one of our most important government programs. Several executives exchanged uneasy glances. That attack would have cost thousands of jobs and hundreds of millions of dollars. She paused. And the person responsible for stopping it is standing beside me. Every eye turned to Heather. Walter stared at his daughter. No, he whispered. Margaret continued. Because of security restrictions, her role was never publicly disclosed. But I have permission tonight to say this. Major Heather Upton led the team that prevented a national security disaster. The ballroom fell silent. No laughter. No whispers. Nothing. Margaret looked directly at Walter. The same daughter you just asked to leave saved a project your career was built upon. Walter's face drained of color. Brett looked as though someone had punched him in the stomach. For years he had told everyone Heather never accomplished anything. Now 200 people were learning the truth at the same time he was. Margaret wasn't finished. There is one more thing. She reached into her purse. And I believe Heather deserves to hear it publicly. In her hand was an old photograph. A photograph of Sergeant First Class Raymond Upton, Heather's grandfather. Part 3. Margaret held up the photograph for everyone to see. I knew this man, she said. Heather's heart stopped. Walter looked stunned. Raymond Upton saved my life in 1987. The room grew even quieter. I was a young government contractor overseas. Our convoy was attacked. Your grandfather pulled me out of a vehicle that was already burning. Margaret smiled sadly at the photograph. He never spoke about it afterward. Never asked for recognition. Never asked for a reward. She turned toward Walter. But he spoke about his granddaughter. Heather felt tears forming. He told me there was one person in his family brave enough to carry on his values. He said her name was Heather. Walter lowered his eyes. For the first time all night, he couldn't look at anyone. Margaret handed the photograph to Heather. 3 months before he died, Your grandfather asked me for a favor. Heather swallowed hard. What favor? Margaret smiled. He asked me to watch your career if I ever had the opportunity. A shocked murmur spread through the ballroom. Years later, when I saw your name on a classified report, I recognized it immediately. Heather stared at her. You knew. For years. Margaret nodded. I couldn't tell anyone. But I followed every promotion, every commendation, every success. She looked around the room. Tonight I watched people laugh at a woman they didn't understand. Then she faced Walter directly. And I watched a father insult the most accomplished person in his family. The words landed like a hammer. Paige looked sick. Brett couldn't meet anyone's eyes. Walter opened his mouth to speak. Nothing came out. For the first time in his life, he had no speech prepared. No explanation. No defense. Only the realization that the daughter he spent decades dismissing had become everything he never bothered to see. And Heather still hadn't said a single word. The silence hurt him more than any argument ever could. Then Heather. Part 4. Heather stepped to the microphone and unfolded her mother's letter. My darling Heather, she read. If you're reading this, I am gone. There is one truth I could never say while I was alive. The room was silent. Your father did not stop your nomination because he hated you. He stopped it because he was terrified. Walter's head snapped up. Carol's words continued. He never told anyone that the night Raymond left for his final deployment, they had a terrible argument. Those were the last words your father ever spoke to his own father before he died. Walter closed his eyes. For years he blamed the army for taking his father away. When you chose the same path, he thought he was losing you too. Tears filled Walter's eyes. He was wrong. Fear became pride, and pride became distance. But he has loved you all along, even when he lacked the courage to show it. Heather lowered the letter. The ballroom remained motionless. Walter slowly stood. For the first time in her life, Heather saw her father without the armor. I was afraid, he whispered. Nobody moved. I spent 20 years pretending your success didn't matter, because admitting I was wrong felt impossible. He looked directly at her. Every promotion I heard about, every rumor, every achievement, I followed all of it. Heather stared at him. I knew you became a major. Gasps spread through the room. Walter nodded. I knew. I just never told anyone. Brett and Paige looked shocked. I was proud of you, Walter said. I was just too stubborn to admit it. For a long moment neither of them spoke. Then Heather touched the dog tags around her neck. Pop would have called both of us idiots. Laughter broke through the tension. Even Walter smiled. For the first time in decades, it was genuine. He stepped forward. I can't get back the years I wasted. No, Heather answered softly. But you can stop wasting the ones you have left. Walter wrapped his daughter in A.H. Part 5. The party should have ended after the applause. It didn't. As guests returned to their tables, conversations shifted. For years Brett had controlled the story people heard about Heather. In a single evening, that story had collapsed. Questions began appearing from every direction. What exactly does Major Upton do? How long has she been serving? You mean she was involved in that project? Brett suddenly found himself standing alone. People who had laughed at his jokes earlier were now looking at him differently. One board member approached him directly. You said your sister never found her footing. Brett forced a smile. Igesi underestimated her. The board member raised an eyebrow. No. I think you misrepresented her. The conversation ended there. Across the room, Paige wasn't having an easier night. Several foundation donors had quietly migrated toward Heather. Not because Heather was seeking attention. Because she wasn't. The woman at the back table had somehow become the most respected person in the ballroom simply by refusing to defend herself. For the first time in years, Paige realized something uncomfortable. Heather never needed the family's approval. The family needed Heather's dignity to make themselves feel important. And now everyone could see it. Part 6. 2 weeks later Walter made a decision nobody expected. He organized a small family dinner. No donors. No executives. No photographers. Just family. Halfway through the meal he stood and cleared his throat. I owe someone an apology. The room fell silent. Walter turned to Heather. For years I convinced myself I was protecting myself from disappointment. His voice shook. The truth is I was protecting my pride. Nobody had ever heard Walter Upton speak that way. I missed promotions, birthdays, achievements, entire chapters of your life. He swallowed hard. And every one of those losses belongs to me. Heather looked at him quietly. I can't erase what happened, Walter continued. But I would like the chance to know my daughter. For a moment nobody spoke. Then Heather nodded once. That's a start. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was the first honest conversation they had shared in over 20 years. And for Walter it meant everything. Part 7, Epilogue. 1 year later. The annual Voss Hartley Leadership Conference filled the same ballroom where Walter had once told Heather to leave. This time things were different. Margaret Voss stood at the podium. Before we begin, I'd like to introduce a special guest. Heather stepped onto the stage. The audience rose in a standing ovation. Not because she wanted it. Because she had earned it. In the front row sat Walter. Beside him sat Paige. Beside her sat Brett. And between them sat 12-year-old Maddie, the loudest person applauding in the room. After the event, Maddie ran over carrying a folder. I got accepted into the summer science program. Heather smiled. I knew you would. Maddie grinned. I want to do something important someday. Heather looked at her grandfather's dog tags. Then at her family. Then back at Maddie. Then don't spend your life trying to impress people. What should I do instead? Heather smiled. Become someone you're proud of when nobody's watching. Years earlier she had entered this ballroom hoping her father would finally see her. Now she understood. The most important thing was that she had never stopped seeing herself. And that was enough. The end.